This is a Going Back, Remembering UGA interview with Doctors Libby Dreesen and Billye Faye Vickers on November 16, 2010. Today we're visiting in the Visitor Center in the Four Towers building on East Campus at the University of Georgia in Athens, Georgia. Thank you, ladies, for being with us today.
Glad to be here.
Libby and Billye Faye, I understand this building where we are today brings back lots of memories for you. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
When I was in pre-vet, I remember having classes here, and we would get up into the barn near the silos, and being a city girl, I wasn't used to the odors from the silage, but going through the X classes and through vet school, we soon learned to deal with a lot of odors.
Used to that, like huh? That. I'll say. Okay.
It was a dairy barn.
Yes, in the dairy barn here.
Actually, when we moved here in the Visitor Center years back, they were having problems in the silos. And do you know that there was silage still in the silos and they had put a cement floor over that?
No.
Very interesting situation. Let's go back, though. Let's go back to the very beginning. And I would like each of you to tell us about your families, your growing up years, and with a little emphasis on your early influences. Who wants to start?
Go ahead.
I would say that two people I almost said. My grandfather, Daddy Bill, and a pony named Smokey, and he was like a human being to me. He bought the pony for me when I was 3 years old to get me outside more, and that worked. And then there was the women in my family. They were pretty strong ladies. There was my Uncle Stephen was the oldest, and then my Aunt Martha, and then my mother and Uncle Pete. And Aunt Martha graduated from UK Law School in 1934, the year I was born. And when I was growing up, she was an attorney, a attorney, and then a judge, a circuit judge. And they would bring me down to meet her while she was holding court, and when she got through, she would take me to lunch or something. And I saw her in court. In fact, I got up one day and sneaked in behind her while she was leaning forward. I could go from the outside room in there and climbed up in her chair and brought the court to order because I liked her gavel. And good bit of humor that day in court, and she picked me up by the collar and took me out. But I had my mother, Daddy got sick when I was 3 years old, so my mother was the breadwinner. She worked a full-time job and then kept books at night for other people in town. And I had the support of my uncle, my grandfather, my Aunt Martha's husband even was a big support to me when I decided I wanted to be a veterinarian. Now, everybody ignored me at first. And my Uncle Stephen said, that's not socially acceptable for a lady to be a veterinarian. That's just not. But he drugged me around on all the farms, and
it was his fault.
I had to work, you know. And he did come around eventually.
We want to hear more about that, Billye Faye, in a minute. Libby, tell me about your beginnings.
When I was growing up, I lived in town, but my dad was from a farming background, and we visited there in the summertime.
And where were you from?
I'm from Atlanta.
Mm-hmm.
And I always liked animals. I was the one that the dog followed home, and I wanted to keep it all the time. So when I went to school, I liked science, and I thought about being a nurse. And then my dog got sick, and they cured it, and it was so wonderful. And then I decided about my junior year in high school, that was what I'd like to do.
Okay. Strong women, and good support, and love of animals. Sounds like what your interests were. What was your earliest introduction to veterinary medicine as a discipline? When did you learn a little bit more about it before you even thought about where you were going to school? Did you?
In high school, they keep asking you what you want to do, what career you want, and just reading on it, and it just sounded like it mixed the science, the medicine, and my love of animals.
Just fit.
Yeah.
Just fit. Okay. What was your first interaction with the University of Georgia College of Veterinary Medicine?
I had, in answer to that other question, I had a lot of exposure to veterinarians, and that got me interested in veterinary medicine. My earliest exposure was when my Aunt Martha and Uncle John flew me down here. It was the first airplane trip I ever took. And it was Thanksgiving weekend. I was in high school, and we had already talked to Ohio State. That was the closest veterinary college. And they weren't accepting any women because they were still fulfilling the quota of World War II veterans, and besides, they didn't have facilities for women. So my uncle found the University of Georgia. He was stationed down here in Atlanta, and flew me down and brought me over to the university and had a meeting with Dean Jones. He took us all through the only building that was here, the pillared building, and the top floor wasn't finished. And he took me all through the college, took great delight in opening the refrigerator where all the anatomy animals were stored, and my Aunt Martha left. I was very interested, and he just totally intrigued me. Then he took us to his office and told me how difficult it was going to be to get into veterinary college, that they barely accepted a woman. They might accept one, and no more than two. And I was sold. I mean, my uncle even took me to a friend of his, and he told me everything bad about veterinary medicine. And when they got through, he was a veterinarian, and he got through, he looked at me and said, "Now, do you still want to be a veterinarian?" I said, "Yeah." I had already encountered all that stuff on the farm and at horse shows, so it didn't bother me.
Ready to go. How about you, Libby?
When they finally decided I was serious about this, my dad brought me down and had an interview, and we found out what I would need to go into vet school, and what courses to take, and how to arrange that.
So you both had a visit to campus. What then happened when we started talking about the admissions and application process? What sort of hurdles or challenges did you meet or have to face with those? What?
In those days, you had certain classes you had to take, and you could get in after 2 years if you got everything in all right. And nowadays, they've added more things, so it's a lot more difficult.
The problem was getting those courses in, because I signed up for physics while I went to the Atlanta division, and I was all signed up for all my courses, and then they said we're only going to offer physics at night. So I went to day and night school to get that quarter done.
I had to go to 2 different organic chemistry classes in the summer before I went into vet school.
Oh, my.
So it was all dependent until the last minute will I get in.
That would have ended my career. Now, Libby, you went to the University of Georgia undergraduate program. Now, did you do 2 years?
I went to Oglethorpe 1 year, and in Georgia 1 year, plus a summer school, double summer school.
And so after your 2.5 or 2.25 years, you were admitted to vet school.
Right.
Wow.
Right.
I did.
Billye Faye?
I went. We moved down here from Maysville, Kentucky, and to establish residency here because they took a larger quota from Georgia than they did anywhere else. They took students from Alabama, Tennessee, Florida, Georgia,
North and
South Carolina, but the quotas out of state were small, and so we moved down here, and Mother got a house and got a new job. I mean, they did everything to help me get into veterinary college, and I took all my pre-vet. I took the first. In fact, I found a receipt. It was $46 a quarter registration fee at the Atlanta division because there was no dormitory fee, nothing. All I had was books and transportation, the expenses of getting to and from there.
That's changed a little, hasn't it?
And now that's Georgia State.
Yeah.
but it was the Atlanta, and it was in an old parking garage, and no air conditioning. And I started in fall of 52. I went the full year, through the summer, through the next year, and still was finishing 2 courses when I was accepted, and had a letter that told me I had to maintain the grades in those courses to get in. Even I was accepted based on that.
So basically you all both did 2 years plus a little and then gained admission.
Now it's 3-year pre-vet.
I was going to say people
And
would,
you wind up with a BS as well as a DVM.
Right. Well, what did you have to do to be admitted? Do you remember what you had to supply, and was there, you'd already had interviews with the dean, but did you have to go back before a committee?
We didn't have an interview with the dean. It was, we just came down and met with
information,
yeah,
right? But what was in the application process? Was it only you only had to show your courses completed and the grades there?
And the GRE test, the grades. It was. We did have an interview.
And they had a band playing outside the window
Yes,
while we took our
right.
test.
It was homecoming, and the band. The windows were open. There's no air conditioning in those days, so the bands were going by.
And
playing.
we're trying to take the entrance exam for veterinary college.
You came to Athens then and sat for an exam while the band played on.
I transferred over here as soon as I took everything I could take and stay at home in Atlanta. I transferred over to the university.
It was during the school year.
And it was
took it.
When you had all your courses complete, or like me, I had 2 courses I was completing, you could apply, and then you had to take an exam, and you were interviewed by a committee.
And your grades, and I guess possibly your high school grades all counted.
I supplied some recommendations, did you?
I'm sure I did.
I had 2 veterinarians I'd worked with up there in Ohio and Kentucky, and they wrote letters for me. And that's all I remember is to apply.
What was the committee's interview? What was the interview like?
Scary.
You're going back too far in my memory right now.
I remember a tape recorder sitting right there, and we were tape recorded.
What kind of
They asked us things like what we intended to do when we graduated. My answer to that, I knew that was a trap. I'd been warned by some veterinary students that if you said the wrong thing, like if you said, I want to do nothing but small animal, that
in
might,
Atlanta especially.
Yeah, that might influence them. So the committee was made up of the registrar and some veterinarians that were professors there at the university. The dean wasn't present. I don't know who else was on that committee, but I was questioned heavily about having moved from Kentucky down here, even though we'd lived here for over 2 years and owned a home and everything. The registrar wasn't happy with that, but he gave up finally. And when they asked me what I intended to do, I said, that's 4 years away. I have no idea. I want to practice veterinary medicine. And that told them I wasn't going into academia, but I went into practice. And the guy, one of the doctors sitting near me said, I didn't know what I was going to do 4 years ago either. So, I mean, they kind of took that.
So that was the right answer.
But other than that, I don't remember too much. They were just mainly wanting to know why you wanted to be a veterinarian. Some questions about our background. Didn't they ask you some questions about background?
Yeah.
Mine was strong with farms and showing horses and training horses, and I had a good hold there, and that probably helped me get in.
Well, Libby, what did you do that helped you get in? Did you talk about the dogs following you
She
home?
was smart.
I don't remember it being real difficult. They just ask you some questions about why you want to be a
You didn't feel like
veterinarian.
they might have asked different questions to male applicants, or did you at any time feel that way in the admissions process? Or
I'm sure they asked us some questions that pertain to females, but I don't really remember a lot of the questions.
At one time, Dean Jones told us in an interview that he'd like to have a couple of women in every class to keep the guys straight. Do you
That
remember
was
that?
good.
And then he wouldn't let us join the professional fraternities. He didn't want us hanging around with the men.
Right.
Very interesting.
He was a character. He was apt to say things like that.
This
at
veterinary
times.
college would not be here, though, without him.
Oh, yes.
He built that
yes.
building.
Well, that's one of the things we wanted to talk about today. Maybe we ought to talk
We'll
about it
wait.
right now. You not ready?
I'm ready. You ready?
Yeah.
Talk about some of those. You talked about Dean Jones as probably, and both of you had mentioned him to me before. So I take it when we talk about memorable campus
He'd be
personalities, he would be
He
the
was
one.
Welch, and when he would really get to talking, he'd fall into that accent.
strong.
Yes, but my understanding of how the vet school got to be built was that they gave him a certain amount of money, and he built the foundation. He knew what he wanted, so then if they wanted to do anything with that foundation, they had to go ahead and build the rest of the building.
Oh, you mean he spent it all on the foundation?
Yeah.
What he
That's
told.
that's the story I heard.
Well, he told us that day I was over here. He said that he built the building, but he didn't put any more inside. He knew he didn't have enough money, so he didn't put any more inside than he had to get the building up. And then he invited the Board of Regents down and took them in to see his progress, and took them inside and said, "Well, fellas, you can store hay in her, but you sure as hell can't teach any classes. I need more money," and they gave him money. That's verbatim. I'm quoting him.
You did that very well. Very well.
Well, he knew every mistake in the building. I mean, he was dedicated to that building, to the students. He really, some of the students were struggling, and he knew they weren't mature. He sent them off to the Army and let them come back in. Two of them entered with us. And he'd go away for a while and come back. They weren't buckling down, but he knew they were capable. I mean, he gave people chances. He was a very unusual man.
Special person. We may talk more about him later. I want you to think back. So, would it have been about 1954 when you both were first on campus?
52.
52.
Well, Libby was here.
I think I came in
50.
fall.
I came in
53.
53.
Okay.
Both of us came in 53.
What did the University of Georgia campus look like in 1953 when you got here? And I know you would more specifically be interested in the area near the vet school, but do you remember? It's changed a lot.
It has changed quite a bit. No buses, for one thing.
Right.
You hitchhiked if you went from one part of town to the other. From over on this side of the creek down there to the main campus.
Right.
You'd
Were you
hitchhike.
both
Ag Hill main campus.
I was going to say, were you both on
Right.
Ag Hill most of the day, most of the
We
time?
had
It's
classes.
both ways
Okay.
in pre-vet. So it was kind of hard to get from one place to another sometime. I think about 4,500 students at that time.
Sounds probably right.
Yeah,
Wow, I didn't know.
yeah.
There was barracks, old Army barracks, all along between the veterinary college and the dormitories. We had to walk down through there, and they were vacant. Now, some of them on the other side were occupied by students.
They were married student
Married
housing.
housing, prefab.
But the
Yeah,
ones
yeah,
over on the other
prefab.
side were vacant.
So the vet school was sort of out in the country, was it? I mean, there was.
No, there were buildings around it, but not as many as today.
Right. Okay. How did you get around?
Hitchhike.
In pre-vet and vet school, we were in the veterinary school.
I was going to say, first let's go back and say, where did you live? When you first came here, where did you live? You were still in undergraduate school, right?
Dormitory, yes.
Okay.
Rutherford Hall.
Rutherford?
Maryland and then Rutherford.
Okay. So you lived there. Then you were admitted to vet school. Were you still living in the residence hall?
I was the first year,
Yeah.
and then I got married.
When she got married, I started trying to, I think it was my senior year, I finally managed, the Dean of Women let me move into a private home. It was hard to study in that dormitory. A lot of the people in the dormitory were playing.
You
And
real,
we'd
real
be
restricted
studying.
going in and out in those days.
Yeah, you had to sign out and sign in, and
Wear something over your, if you had to go out with pants on to go on call or something, you had to wear a raincoat, summer or winter.
Did you have practical experience immediately when you started vet school? Were you just in class, or you were talking about getting out to go on calls?
Yeah.
When did you, so if you were living in a residence hall, I can imagine it would be awfully hard to go to the horse, somewhere to look after a horse and still have your Peter Pan collar and your
Right.
dyed to
always-
match on, yeah.
We weren't really going on call, but you'd have to wear coveralls when you in the anatomy lab and things like that before we went on calls later.
So you were in the residence hall for a couple of years, and then both of you, your senior year in undergrad school, right?
no grad. We were in veterinary college.
Right, but you lived in a residence
We
hall
still-
all the way through
All the way
vet
through,
school?
yes, until the last year when I moved in with Ms. Doolittle. I think I moved in with her this summer. No, I moved in with her the third year of veterinary college, next to last year. Sometime during that year I moved in with Ms. Doolittle. I had to pick from a list of people that the Dean of Women gave me. And
She
Ms. Doolittle
vetted a
had
list,
lost,
and that was okay.
she'd had a stroke and had lost her husband, and she was afraid to live alone. By the time I left, she had a job and wasn't afraid to live alone. But Ms. Doolittle was also very special to me, and the dorm was so hard to study in. And also, I would study down at the vet college until I had to get back to the dorm. Midnight was usually, when you were in as far along in college as we were, midnight was the deadline. And one night I remember a mare had a foal early, and they would come down and hunt people that were in the building to help them. The doctors would, and they came in where we were studying, and we all went down to help with the mare. And the foal was too young when it was born, and he gave it to me to take care of. And I said, I've got to go back to the dorm. And he said, let me talk to your house mother. And he did. And he got mad because she told him real quick I had to be in that dorm at 12 o'clock. So I said, don't worry about it. I went to the dorm. I never did sneak out. I didn't want to get in trouble. And I knew girls sneaked out through the back door and just chalked it. And the night watchman left it alone. So I went out. I said, I'll be back in a few minutes. And I went out the back door. And I took care of that foal night and day until it died by sneaking out the back door of the dorm at night. But we were so restricted.
Yeah,
Sign in, sign out. And they didn't take into consideration our profession.
But Libby, you worked that out by getting married, huh?
There you go.
That's yeah.
I said she's smart.
The kinds of questions. So basically, after you were admitted to the College of Veterinary Medicine, it was pretty much night and day at the vet school. Is that right?
8 to 5 and nighttime.
Pretty much.
Checking lab results.
And your regular. We
things.
talked about women's restrictions on or the requirements for women in terms of their clothing, and until the late 60s, you were required to wear. You could not wear shorts or slacks on campus. What did you all do when you went to class, or then when you had practical experiences that you had to go to?
Put a coat on over them.
Leaving the dormitory, they had a dressing room at the vet school. They had a shower, lockers, and a dressing area. So you could change there.
Okay. And then you wore coveralls and boots and such
Right.
as that when you. Okay. I think you've almost answered this question. As professional school students, I would think that your interaction with undergrads would have been limited. Is that right?
Only in pre-vet did I see much of undergraduates.
Right.
And my roommates, one was a pharmacy major.
So she was busy too.
And she was pinned to a fellow at Sigma Nu, and Pat Morgan was in pre-vet with me, and he was a Sigma Nu. So I socialized at Sigma Nu some until I got in veterinary college, not much after that. We were isolated, and really it was nicer. We knew everybody. I went to a homecoming dance once, and it was just huge. And small town me, I didn't like that. I wanted to know some of the people.
Right.
And it was hard to bump into somebody you knew at that thing. So we had 2 professional fraternities. They had parties. Their parties coincided with when we didn't have exams. So we attended those most of the time. And very little outside the veterinary college, because we didn't have time.
Right.
Yeah.
I'm sure.
8 to 5 classes.
Really?
And if you had a lab test you were running, you might be back over there pulling that thing out and writing it up. You know, as part of your curriculum. We had all kinds of stuff we had to do at night. And then I studied at the dorm, at the vet college at night a lot.
I think everybody did.
Yeah, we
did
could
too.
study together that way.
We had a class, though, that got to be really close, and even after vet school, we get together, a good many come for the annual.
This your 19th class of 58?
We're very close.
We still
Right.
get a newsletter every year. People write in, tell about what's going on.
That's because of our secretary, Sid Ewing. He's done it ever since we graduated. And we mail him the information. He puts it together and mails it back out.
So being the only 2 women, is that right? You were the only 2 women in your class?
Right.
There were only 4 in the whole college when we were in there.
So, but you didn't feel like, I was going to say the odd man out, which sounds a little funny. You were welcomed by everybody and
Just about everybody. I
They
told
tested
Billye Faye
us.
one time, we kind of agreed it's like having 62 crazy brothers. You know, everybody was a little bit different. Most of them were helpful and nice.
supporting each other and
Yes,
getting through what
yes.
you had to get through, huh?
And the faculty too, I couldn't see them.
Faculty was
A lot
very
of
good to
difference.
us. Yeah, they
That's
did.
great.
Now the guys tested us a lot the first year, and they loved to tease us. They teased all the time, and they're still at it. We had a 50th reunion, and they were still at it when we were having our pictures made up on the porch.
They found out I blushed easily, and then boy, I was really the butt of the jokes then.
Well, tell us some of the anecdotes. Tell us about some of the stories of the first, being in the first wave of women in veterinary medicine. You know, going back to All Creatures Great and Small, that great,
Loved his books.
those wonderful books, and later on programs on PBS. I mean, did you end up with your up to your waist in horses, trying to help deliver babies, which you said, you had done that, Billye Faye, before you ever got to vet school. Were there some of those anecdotes and stories that...
There was really a lot of the people in the rural areas around here didn't know how to handle the women, and the men would not even say bull to a woman. Bull now. So, they would be a little hesitant sometimes when we went out on the farms to talk to us.
They would talk all the way around the word castration.
Anything to
like
do with
that.
reproduction.
Yeah.
Mortifying, huh?
Yes, it was.
And you had to stop and think, now what's he trying to say? But I was kind of used to that. But now in showing horses, the horse people are very frank about everything. They talk up front. So I didn't run into that when I was growing up. I ran into it after. But when I got out in practice, they were so curious about a woman vet. I had no problem with the very rarely did I have a problem with.
Now, you were large animal,
anybody.
weren't you?
Well, I did a mixed practice in the beginning. The funniest one I had was a man that had a dairy farm, and I was working with another vet in Durham, North Carolina, and he called in. This fellow was cutting out the large animal practice that he had, but he was still seeing a few. and he called in. We were swamped, and he kept calling. This cow was down, and finally, the owner, Dr. Gurley, came to me and said, "Would you take that call?" I said, "Sure." And it was a cow with milk fever. And when I arrived, I introduced myself. He walked up to we used station wagons then. He walked up to the vet car and he says, "Where's Dr. Gurley?" And I said, "Sir, he couldn't come. We're just swamped." Well, I didn't want a woman. I told him who I was and everything. And I said, "Well, is your cow pretty sick and she'd been down all day?" He said, "Yes." And I said, "Well, you've either got me or nothing." And I got out. He said, "Well, come on." And the better the cow got, the nicer he got. And that was an easy case. You just started giving them a certain drug IV and they recovered. And the better that cow got, the nicer he was. And later he showed up in the hospital and the secretary came back to surgery laughing and said, "There's somebody out here insists on seeing you." And I said, "Who?" She said, "You'll find out." And I got out there and it was this gentleman and he had a beautiful pointer puppy in his arms. And I said, "Oh, you don't want to see me, you want to see Dr. Gurley." "Oh," he says, "No, I want to see you." So I was his vet from then on.
Isn't that great?
But that was the only one I ever had that almost rejected me. Everybody else
Didn't
was
have much trouble then.
curious to see if I knew anything or not.
That's great. And Libby, did you practice after vet school?
No. My husband came into vet school 2 years after me. He had got a degree before he went in.
Uh-huh.
And about the only thing around here, inspection service was just starting to be mandatory.
Mm-hmm.
At the beginning of, I graduated in 58 and it started in 59, so they were hiring a lot of people that summer to get them ready for that. And there's 2 poultry plants here in town, so I got into that at that point.
Her job,
with USDA.
her job was very important. She would play it down, but looking after the food for the human beings
I agree.
is a very important job. And it's a phase of veterinary medicine. It's very important. You were talking about people on the campus. I have to mention some people. Dr. Causey was head of small animal, and he took us in at the end of the year. When we were graduating. He took individually every student into his office and talked to them about their potential, and he tried to pick out things that we might not realize we had a capability for. In my case, I was into the horses. And he said, "Don't forget, you're good at small animal." And he made sure I understood I wasn't just good on horses. And then there was Dr. Knapp, who was our pharmacology professor. We had a little magazine we wrote articles for. He had me on the staff. I would never have volunteered for that, and now I write articles for magazines sometimes. I mean, he started me into that. And there was Dr. Hoffman. You wouldn't have the equine program you have here, at least not as fast as they got it, if it hadn't been for Paul Hoffman. The dean was homed in on food animals. Paul Hoffman was into the horses. And Dr. Mills, he went to Cornell, didn't he?
I think so.
I never saw that man walk. Did you?
No, he ran.
He was running wherever he went, little thin man. And I've seen him many days. We'd come in from calls after a long day, and he'd be out pulling grass, have a bucket, pulling grass to feed some downer cow. And we'd all pour out of the vet ambulance and start helping him pull grass. He was the kindest man. He and Paul Hoffman would come get the people that were interested in horses out of class to go when they had a special equine case in there. We'd go down to see that.
One reason for the small animal and everything, the legislature depended on how much money they gave the vet school. It was mostly agriculture interest there
Right.
in the legislature, so you had to have a large
I guess
animal.
agribusiness was
Yes,
our main.
the money you got depended on it
Right.
at that time.
Yeah, I understand about that. Libby, do you have any special memorable campus personalities that we've not talked about?
I think Billye Faye pretty well covered it.
Covered the waterfront?
Yes.
Talk about what a day was like. You talked about 8 to 5. What was an average day like, academically and then practical experience-wise? Sit in class and then get up and go. I know we had a dog in the vet school for about 3 months not long ago. Actually, more like a month. We couldn't have afforded 3 months ever.
Well,
but it was interesting to see all the vet students and how they interacted and the kinds of things that they were doing. What was a day like?
It depended on where you were, but in the laboratories, we'd have to come back in and check them daily and on weekends a lot of times. And
All right, tell us what a laboratory is. Was that looking after an animal, or was that doing work on blood work
about,
and
we took
the
biology,
chemistry?
all of that chemistry and
Bacteriology.
Bacteriology.
Pathology.
We had.
When
keep
were
up
you
with
allowed
all
to
lab
start working
animals.
on animals? How long into the program? Vet school was how many years when
Third
you were?
year, wasn't it? Third year.
Mm-hmm.
Now, we had more hands-on than some veterinary colleges did. We were told that by visiting students, that we were allowed more hands-on on the animals. Now, we were under supervision the whole time, just like they are now.
Mm-hmm.
We started classes, the first 2 years, it was heavy on the courses that prepared us to work on the animals. Pathology, bacteriology, virology, genetics, anatomy, a whole year of anatomy. The whole morning was anatomy lab. And
What happened in anatomy lab? Did you have a horse carcass on the table? How did it work?
I fought for the only horse carcass that was there. We had mules and horses and cows, and then at the end of the year, we were working on various other animals, but the main early part was dissection. We came in and rolled our carcasses out and sat at in groups. We were on teams. And we sat in teams and dissected the animal. You'd peel the hide down and start dissecting. And at the end of the day, you pin the hide back up so that the carcass wouldn't dry out. We even had to put the animals to sleep, and which I hated. And even though they were all animals that were suffering or something, that we put down, and then we had to embalm them, and then we stored them, and then we started
And
working
you all
on
did that work yourselves? Woo.
I hate that. There's parts of it, you have to go through it to be one, but you don't want to repeat it.
Right.
And every horse I had, or dog or cat, anything I had to put down. The first one I did, I thought, I can't put that back. It's gone. I didn't like it. And neither did the others. The people I worked for dumped all the euthanasia on me until I figured it out. It was, Dr. Redmond, would you please put this animal to sleep? Yes, sir. Until I finally realized they weren't putting any to sleep. And I had a little meeting. We didn't like doing that.
Yeah.
We liked making things live.
Better. You wanted it to be better. I hear you. That's why you got into this.
But we
Right.
went all day in
Right.
classes and had a lunch break. Breaks between classes were very brief, and then at 5 o'clock we were done, and we started studying, or we came back and did work. And then the last 2 years, we were mainly going out on calls, doing more of the practical work.
But you'd go in different groups, whether you're in surgery, on your call, large animal, small animal.
We wrote,
Lab, they had lab work.
I know for us, we had students meet with us.
Mhm.
When
We did too.
So you all actually
We did
met
that.
with the owners?
We stood there while Dr. Causey talked to
Talked
them
to
if
them.
it was small animal, or somebody involved that was already a doctor
Right.
would be talking to them, but we'd be present.
They might
And
ask
they
you
might
to, yeah.
refer to us about something,
Right.
or And in the case of the large animals, we went out in groups. We rotated. You just rotated from, you might be in pharmacy, large animal, small animal. In small animal, we cleaned cages, and kept the animals clean and everything. Fed them, looked after them. I didn't know not to tell people I knew how to milk a cow, and I wound up milking all these mastitis cows, which was not pleasant. And almost milked a rabid cow one day, and a senior student caught me and said that I thought he was teasing me. I was climbing right on over the fence. He said, "No, Billye Faye, that cow has rabies." I said, "Right," and kept on going until I realized he was panicking. And I climbed back up on the fence, and I had not seen a rabid cow until then. I wouldn't forget it. I'd know it if I saw it again.
So you don't put down a rabid cow?
Oh, this cow was put down, but it had been unloaded late in the day. And they would forget to tell me they had brought in a cow, and I'd always go check the pens. And when I was on that duty, I would check the pens. And I just thought she'd come in for that. They had not. They held her for the students to see, and then they put her down. But we rotated around, and we had senior students on our team with us when we were juniors. And then we became seniors. They had graduated. We had the other class on the teams with us.
Sort of mentoring the folks.
They sort of helped train you.
Right.
Except when they were scared to death of a horse and not afraid of a bull. I mean, I had one like that on my team.
So you ended up doing the scary horses, and
we all got together. He had never touched, he was even afraid of ponies, and he had never touched one. And we got together with the Spanish doctor. I can't say his name. Anyway, one of the doctors, we told him he hadn't touched the horse. We wanted him to touch one. And he had to operate on a pony, and we finally took over and shooed him off because he was jumping 10 feet back every time the thing twitched. So we took over and finished.
Small animals.
But he wasn't the least bit afraid of a bull. Mean bull, didn't bother him a bit. He'd baby talk to him and hang over the fence.
Also, the Georgia Center was built just about the senior year it was finished. And they had a group of us go up and had surgery, and they taped it up there.
She was on that group.
Is that right?
Well, I wasn't doing the surgery. I was standing back helping out.
Well, you look
anyway.
good.
Talk about the inspection business, Libby, a little bit.
When it got started, it was funny because we would learn on the line what we were doing, and then the chickens, we knew someone was sick, but they weren't mandatory inspection then, so they would just go right on through. And the inspection went real deep into labeling and how they cleaned up and how the people dressed and how they handled things.
So you went into a factory?
Yes.
I mean, a poultry operation?
Yes.
And there were things. How did you learn how to do that? You were trained by the USDA?
On the job, yes, it's USDA.
Now, we had some we had a meat inspection course in veterinary college, but it was very brief, wasn't in depth.
It wasn't hands-on.
You didn't have to pull a chicken off every once in a while and take a look, or?
Oh, yeah, all of that, yeah. There were inspectors on the line, and I was used, but to learn, you do it too.
But you didn't look at every chicken?
Somebody does.
Is that right?
The inspection service at that time, yeah, at every chicken.
Part of the practices where I worked, a lot of the veterinarians were doing meat inspection back in those days as part of their practice, especially if they had a mixed practice. And the first practice I worked for had several, and they trained me. I knew enough about it to go out and inspect. I knew a healthy liver, kidneys, or parasites, and from doing what we did in veterinary college. And this was cattle and hogs, and they taught me, the first thing they taught me said, if you don't think it's right, you cut it out or condemn it, whatever. And they taught me a whole lot about how to keep them from picking stuff up you had discarded and things like that. They were very good at the meat inspection. What you did in their practice, there were 3 veterinarians when I was there. I made 3, and we rotated small animal, large animal, and a floater. And if you were on small animal, you did the surgery. If you were on large animal, you did the meat inspection, as well as the calls. If you didn't have enough calls, you came back in and helped in the small animal and became a floater. And you'd be running back and forth. Wherever we got overloaded, the other one was pitching in and helping. And it worked beautifully, and I learned a lot with them. Then the next vet I worked for over in Durham, I did all of his meat inspection. We rotated it at the other hospital, but he had me doing all the meat inspection. And then when I went into my own practice, I didn't do any. Then at the end, when I quit practicing, I went up to North Carolina, and I was supervisor meat and poultry. I didn't do any slaughter plants for poultry, but I did packaging plants for poultry. And I did meat inspection at the end.
Very interesting. I think we sometimes just don't think about that.
I was supervisor and had up to 14 men under me doing the work. There were very few women. I had one woman come on while I had them, and there were very few women supervisors. There'd only been 2. 3. I was the 3rd one. And it's hard work. And the inspectors I had were, most of them, now there was always a bad egg, but most of them were very dedicated to their job and did a good job and got up at all hours in all weather and went to their job. They had to.
I'm glad to hear that. And y'all, while I'm chewing on that chicken breast the next time, I'll say a prayer for the vets.
Libby took care of it for you.
Say a prayer for the vets. What was the most memorable experience that you had in vet school? The most memorable practical experience that you had?
Gosh, I can't think of any one particular thing.
Special animal? Funny, poignant?
I have one that was funny in a way, but it also broke the ice for me when I started on clinics. And that first case was castrating a full-grown 1,200-pound horse. And Dr. Cruz put me out on a rope. We put a casting harness on him, gave him a general anesthetic. The casting harness, there's a certain way to pull the ropes to lay them down a certain way when they got dopey enough to lay down. And he put me on the end of the rope with the fellow that was scared to death of horses. And I had grown up knowing we had harness horses that would fall over backwards sometimes, and you had to if they were young and something like not trained enough, you would grab their heads, because if you hold a horse's head down, he can't get up. And you'd hold their head down until people could get there and get the harness undone. I had already done that, and I was back, but he put me back there because he didn't know me. And he had somebody giving the anesthetic. He had other guys on other ropes, and the one that was given the anesthetic was supposed to disconnect. And when the horse went down, the one standing holding the horse's head was supposed to get on the horse's head. And nobody got on the horse's head. And I'm standing back at the end of this rope. And the horse was down, and they were all just like, and I got on the horse's head. I mean, it just instinct. I'd done it. I ran down and grabbed the halter and laid down on his head. I had to lay down on it because I couldn't hold him down any other way. And I was laying there, and Dr. Cruz, I hear him, everybody got real quiet, and they were still standing there. And Dr. Cruz said, "Well, you're going to let that little lady hold the horse down for you?" And all of the men were great, big, tall men. And they were all big on I felt like a midget when I was with them. And everybody all of a sudden got busy. Somebody offered to take the horse's head. I said, no, I've got the head. And they finished up their work on the horse. And Dr. Cruz was a difficult man to please. And I think that broke the ice for me with him. He knew he could depend on me to hold a horse or do something like that. Paul Hoffman was the same way.
I think he was an ex-Marine.
Who, Dr. Cruz?
I think
We
so.
called him Smiling Sam. Great surgeon, great surgeon. Did some things nobody else was doing.
You were his prime pupil that day.
He still never smiled at me. I mean, we called him Smiling Sam because he never smiled. But we always said he didn't know there were any first-year students. He just didn't know they existed. Second year, he knew they were there, but he'd rather they stayed away. Third-year students, he acknowledged they were there. And the fourth-year students, he would talk to them.
Let's talk a little bit about the history of the College of Veterinary Medicine through the years. And this may be not fair to ask you all, but the College of Veterinary Medicine didn't begin here on campus until 50, 51.
They had a veterinary college here, I was told, and then they closed it. And then they started the one Dean Jones built. Now, I don't know
I
much
think they
more
had
than
some
that.
classes before the vet school was built,
Okay.
was finished. Some of the people in the first class, I heard something about this, they had a vet school before it too, but I don't know anything
I
about
don't
it.
either.
Okay, but
Now, there were,
But I think they did had some classes, and if you talk to that first class or two,
first class
before the
graduated
building
in
was
what,
there.
51,
No.
52? Would that sound about right?
no, we started in 52. I
No,
want to
it's
say
in the
49. 49 or 48.
Yeah, probably.
Now, there were only 15 veterinary colleges in the United States when we started.
How many are
Two
there
in
today?
Canada.
Do we know?
Well, they've added Florida, Tennessee, North Carolina in the South. There are only 2 in the Southeast, Auburn and Georgia. And now they've got Tennessee and Florida and North Carolina all have colleges.
And there were 60, but you usually ended up, I think we ended
don't
up with
know how many there
64
are now.
at some point
Yeah, we had 64.
In your
But
class.
in our class. And I understand they were getting ready to expand to have over 100 now.
They had
Students.
trouble back when not long after Tennessee had been graduating students. I was in a meeting and they were having trouble. They had big classes here, and at the other colleges were taking more students, and they were having trouble passing the state board. They were taking some that weren't really qualified, and they cut the classes back. It was discussed in our meetings. It was AVMA, our Georgia Veterinary Medical Association meeting, and the Tennessee dean was over here talking, and as a speaker, and they were having the same problem. They weren't passing the state boards, and they cut the classes back. Now I wonder, when they're enlarging these classes, if they must be. What I saw of the students, I haven't had a horse over here this year. They have been, every one of them, very good at what they're doing.
My understanding when we were in vet school that a lot of the other schools took in large freshman classes, and then it was hard to go on
Whittle
beyond the first
down
year.
after that first
and
year.
I can't give you any specifics on that. Georgia always expected you, if you got in, you ought to be able to graduate.
Right. Right.
Yeah. And the dean wanted professionals. That was another thing about Dean Jones. He required us to wear dresses when we weren't in class, and Libby mentioned earlier that about the stockings. I had forgotten that. We couldn't afford them, so we didn't wear stockings, but we wore dresses and shoes,
And socks.
socks. And the men had to wear ties, which they hid, clip-on ties. They put in their pockets. And somebody yelled, "Dean's coming," and everybody whip out their tie.
I have a funny story about that. When the accreditation group was coming through one time, they got down to the large animal barns, and all of the animals down there had ties on.
He had a French surgeon showing him through that day. Libby and I were standing down in front of the feed room, and we were just hee-hawing. They put a bow tie on the steer that we use for blood collection.
He wasn't too happy about that.
And had a sign up over him, the colonel, and a red tie hanging out. And I know who that fellow was afraid of horses put the red tie on a Santa Gertrudis bull that was mean as a snake. He was in a corner stall, and I don't know how he got that tie on that horn. But it was everything had ties
Dressed
on.
up for the committee coming
Yes.
through, huh?
And the dean appeared in the doorway and made an exclamation, and I grabbed Libby. I said, "Let's get out of here."
Flee the scene. How's today's vet school? You said you had a horse over here, Billye Faye. How is today's vet school different from the vet school that you all graduated from in 1958?
Bigger, much improved on our equipment. I mean, they have so much more. It was after I graduated that they developed an inhalant anesthetic machine for horses. We always used all IV drugs.
And you didn't cast them on the ground anymore. Oh,
It's they have so much added to their medicine bag that we didn't have.
Have you been through the veterinary college?
Only with my animal this
You ought to
last
get
year.
a 2 or 3.
Yeah.
Only with my animal.
My
and
daughter's a technician nurse
She's
in
good
the
at
small
that.
animal clinic. If you'd like to go through, I'll try to
Well, that'd be
see
great.
if
You
she
should
could
go
show you
through.
sometime.
The number of students is much larger, and they have interns here now that they've graduated. We couldn't stay when we graduated. We left.
I don't think there were any graduate degrees there, were they? Veterinary?
I don't know if they have one now, but they do have.
Oh, they have a bunch.
Do they?
now.
They have interns walking around down there doing work.
Our interns are people who've already completed their
Veterinary places
degree,
and
and
getting
are
a
they getting some?
I guess they could have
Advanced
even
degree.
graduated
Mhm.
somewhere else, couldn't
Yeah.
they, Libby? Could they graduate from someplace else
The
and come in
interns,
here?
yeah.
I thought so. And I brought my Mary in, and she sweated up in the trailer coming over here. And while Dr. Peroni and his crew were starting an evaluation and discussing her with me, looking at radiographs, immediately I saw this young lady in the stall who was an intern with brush and curry comb starting to brush her. Best thing you could do for a horse. I mean, when it lands in your stall, you start grooming it, and they understand grooming. And I said, well, I like that girl right there. But they were always taking really good care of her. And I came every day. I hardly missed a day coming over here to groom her and check on her. And they were taking really good care of her.